Hey, thanks for tuning into the Land and Home Show. And today we're talking with Mitch Florence from Guaranteed Rate about all things economy and the housing market. Hi, I'm Stephen J.B. Davis, your land specialist and residential realtor here in Central Kentucky and beyond. Excuse my voice, I'm a man-child and have never been more irate than the Michigan game this past weekend. We're not going to talk about that today, but if you do have trouble hearing me, that's why I'll try to boost up the volume in post. But he will be doing most of the talking. And so, Mitch, I just appreciate you joining me here and just let everybody know who you are, why you're dressed so well, and what you do.
Absolutely. Well, number one, thank you for having me. Condolences on the loss. But no, as Stephen said, Mitch Florence, I am Vice President of Mortgage Lending at Guaranteed Rate here in Lexington, Kentucky. Been in banking or lending for the better part of a decade now, which sounds crazier when I say that. But no, I dressed well because I knew I was going to be with you.
Okay. Last time I saw this guy, I was in a sweatshirt. But that is very kind. 10 years.
10 years.
So you've seen quite a few things.
Yeah, I got into banking, honestly, and that's some of what we'll get into is kind of the crazy years that we've seen.
Yeah.
I got into banking kind of in a crazy time, post 08, graduated college in 2010 and kind of went into the banking right after that. So I was seeing the after effects of what obviously happened in 08. So it was a good learning curve, right? Kind of to see us come out of that, which I do think was preparation for what we've experienced and what we're experiencing now.
Yeah. Well, let's just start with most recent memory. We are now in January 3rd.
January 3rd.
Which is really crazy. We're in January and fourth quarter is over.
Yeah.
So when you look at Central Kentucky, and obviously you can do loans pretty much in the whole state, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But if we're looking at Central Kentucky, which is mainly where I work residentially, how would you summarize the fourth quarter market in the 2022?
Yeah. So Q4, number one, I think people have to realize is there is some seasonality in real estate, right?
Yes.
We've been really hammering on it as an industry of, sales are down, volumes down, rates are up. Well, we got to remember that there's some seasonality as well. So I think some of that entering into Q4 played into that. It wasn't just rates.
Yeah. Appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. Time of the year plays into it. So I'll give you some kind of data points and then I'll give you some personal observations, okay? So LBAR, now stats are lagging, any numbers are going to be lagging, but through October, home sales were down 24% year over year here locally. That's actually better than the national average. Median sales price was up, days on market were up, and the inventory, although we don't really feel like it was statistically up.
Wow.
So what that tells me, obviously, people are still buying homes, right? Maybe not at the same pace, but people are still buying homes. And although the home sales were down, you got to realize you were coming out of 2020 and 2021, which
unprecedented
in real estate, in mortgage,
cars, construction, you name it.
So that's where I think people get in trouble with. They just look at the numbers and don't really put that in the context. It's a lot of doom and gloom that we see out in the media.
Yeah.
And it's all relating back to what you and I talk about. Hey, is now a good time to buy real estate? My answer is always going to be yes for you as an individual.
Right.
But yeah, so Q4 locally, obviously some of the numbers are down. What am I noticing kind of anecdotally or personally? Buyers are still out there. The buyers are still out there. I judge that or gauge that based on the amount of conversations that I have, not only with professionals such as yourself, but with consumers. I think you've seen a lot of people sideline themselves for a number of reasons. Again, time of the year plays into that.
Yeah.
Obviously, the rates, which everybody knows by now, rates went through an unprecedented year of volatility in 2022. But the buyers are out there. The other thing I mentioned is from a negotiating standpoint, and you can talk to this as well, it's a better time, in my opinion, to negotiate as a buyer.
Certainly in comparison to the last 2 years.
Sure.
Yes.
So that could play a huge advantage in and of itself, because people don't realize, if you tried to buy a home or sell a home in 2020, 21, it was pandemonium.
Yes.
Right? So even though rates may be up a little bit, is it going to afford you an opportunity to negotiate on a property that would have never had a chance in the last 2 years? Maybe.
Yeah.
And I think that's an advantage that people don't really think about right now.
I totally agree. There are a couple of things that I wanted you to expand on.
Yeah.
You talked about 24% less sales
Sure.
than year over year, I guess. And you said that was better than average. And can you just talk about exactly how local real estate is? Because I have conversations with people maybe thinking about buying, exploring, selling, all of these different things, not really sure if they really want to jump into full-fledged serious buying or selling. And they always reference, these headlines.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yes, those are statistical, that's real news, but contextually, that's national. And what's happening nationally does not necessarily tell the story locally. So what do you have, I don't know, what kind of advice do you have in terms of perspective, or what more can you speak to on the subject of national versus local?
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly on a number of those points. But yeah, ultimately, real estate is going to be geographically specific. There's no two buts about it. You cannot compare metropolitan Lexington, if that's even two words you want to put together. You can't compare Lexington Metro versus New York City,
right?
As an example, you just can't do it. So yeah, that's another point. You have to be careful how you interpret data. And I think you look at these headlines. If we're being honest, you look back over the last decade, they've been calling for a housing bubble for literally 12 years since the last one.
Yeah.
Now, are certain markets going to experience economic downturns differently? Absolutely, and we saw that 08, right? Yes, there were markets that lost 20, 30+%.
Right.
But those are going to be your major metropolitan areas, your New Yorks, your Chicagos, your Miamis, some West Coast, California areas. So I don't want to go as far as saying Central Kentucky or Lexington in general is a little insulated, but it is definitely a different market. To put a real number on it, so nationally, as of November, and I think this data came out last week, nationally home sales were down just about 38% year over year. So again, we're a little bit better than average here in Central Kentucky.
Thank you for that expansion. So one of the reasons why I think that you're awesome, especially professionally, is how much you love to nerd out on stuff. And so the last time we talked, you were speaking about the Fed was having its last meeting.
Sure.
This was back in December that we met, and you were looking at the consumer confidence or consumer price? CPI. Yeah. Like there's a lot of consumer and then things that come after that. But so there are all of these very official things that we look to as real estate professionals, but also just as that economists look to for informing their thoughts on the stock market and global trading and all sorts of things. So when those things happened, what did you come away with as it relates to homes?
And I think probably the biggest driver in that is going to be how it relates to rates, right? Which rates are going to be an important discussion point in 2023, and we'll get into kind of predictions and outlooks and things like that. We'll give away to them. Okay, the Fed is going to be important, right? Yep. They're going to play an important role as they did this past year, and the mortgage rates are going to be important as well. But yeah, I am a self-admitted dork, especially when it comes to numbers and how it relates to finances and real estate. But a lot of that is how it affects the mortgage rates, right? because that's a big driver in affordability and then therefore people's confidence and willingness to buy and sell homes. So yeah, Fed's going to play an important role. My takeaway from their last meeting was, number one, they continue to acknowledge that inflation is real. Hey, go figure. Thanks for that realization. They may have come in at a little too slow in my opinion, but hey. Their number one goal is going to bring inflation down or continue to bring inflation down. And that's where things like CPI, the Consumer Price Index, comes in. That's one of their favorite measures of inflation.
Okay.
So again, my big takeaway is they're going to continue to fight it. And in my opinion, a lot of 23 is going to be similar to 2022 in the sense that the markets are going to react to how the Fed reacts to this economic data.
Gotcha.
An important day, mark my words, depending on when you're watching this, it's going to be January 12th.
Okay.
That's when we get the next CPI update. And then the Fed meets again end of January, beginning of February.
Okay. Can you really back up really quick?
Yeah.
What is a CPI? Both for my purposes, because I don't get this deep like you do, but also for anyone watching. What is the Consumer Price Index?
Yeah, so Consumer Price Index, quite simply, is an index that is used as a measure of inflation, right? It takes into account a number of different categories and then essentially scores that, right? CPI, just think about it, Consumer Price Index. And that's what, again, the Fed uses to kind of gauge where inflation is at. So if we see inflation or CPI decelerating, okay, or basically slowing down, or ideally coming back down, that would be positive for some of the markets as a whole, definitely for mortgage rates. Because inflation is a big driver of mortgage rates, as we saw.
Right? And so when you say consumer price, are those things like gas, groceries?
There's a number of different categories, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Very helpful.
And I wish I could recite all of the consumer spending categories.
It is not a quiz. It's okay. I wanted to put something cement a little bit of it when you say different prices for things.
Sure. Yeah.
But things that everyday people purchase.
Absolutely.
And do. Got it. Okay. So your takeaway again was that the Fed is very important, obviously, but also that. Their big thing is that they want to slow inflation.
Correct.
That is, and they're acknowledging inflation.
Correct.
Because for a while it was like
it was transitory.
Yeah, right. I was like, anyway. So then, going off of that, what do you as a professional see as it relates to our housing market for 2023? That's the number one question. If ever someone's asking, is it the right time to buy? Is it the right time to sell? Really what they are asking me is, what's going to happen?
Correct.
And you don't have a crystal ball, but you are smarter than me, so.
Get the same questions. Number one, not even just because of the times that we've experienced in the last couple of years. My advice is always going to be not to try to time any market, right? Whether you're talking about different asset classes like bonds, stocks, real estate, don't try to time the market, right? Experts try to do that every day and get it wrong every day.
Yep.
So as it relates to real estate, important questions for me to ask clients, consumers, just other professionals is, when we get the question of, hey, is it a good time to buy? My question is it a good time for you, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have a need for housing? Do you have a reason to move? Can you afford what we are trying to purchase? If all of those answers are yes, then absolutely, now's a good time to buy. Because again, if we try to time the market, quite frankly, I can't tell you if rates won't go up in 2 weeks.
Right.
Could come down.
And you can't predict that.
No, don't want to.
Right. I had a set of clients who were trying to purchase, and they ultimately did purchase a home, but on the Monday that they were getting their rate locked in so that they could apply and say we're worthy borrowers, the Fed had increased interest rates twice that day.
Sure.
Which was unprecedented. Could I have predicted that? Absolutely not. They certainly weren't expecting it. And it was very unpleasant for everyone involved. But what was anyone to do?
Yeah.
You know?
And some of that, again, is just kind of the fun of being in the real estate industry.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example on kind of the other side of that. I was listening to a gentleman tell a story, and he was a major real estate investor. Owned multiple properties, and this was post 08. Had a number of different homes. I believe he was in Florida, and bought this home, and you're probably talking $500,000 home. Obviously, prices decreased in certain markets, and he should have held on to the property. It was cash flowing. He chose to sell it at the bottom.
Wow.
He didn't have to, and he admitted that. He didn't have to sell it, but he was trying to time the market, right? He was trying to time the bottom. So he did the math. If he'd have kept that home through today, again, through the downturn, right?
Mm-hmm.
What happened? Home prices came back up, and they've appreciated more than we saw in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Cost himself $400,000 to $500,000
Because
because he tried to time the market.
right.
Little different example, but that's why I go back. Everybody needs to individualize this decision. I don't like to talk in generalities because may be a good time for me to buy a home, may not be a good time for you to buy a home right now, vice versa. So that's where I always end up, especially for residentialists. Hey, it's now a good time for you.
Yeah. Do you have a prediction that you want to go on record for
So getting into
what it's going to be?
Getting into more predictions. Again, I think the Fed's going to play a major role. Rates are going to be a huge discussion. If I were to give you a prediction, I do think rates are going to continue to come down a little bit from the peak. They peaked in kind of late October, early November. We were well into the sevens on a 30-year fixed at certain points in 2022, which we haven't seen in a long time.
Not since the 2008 that people were.
I don't think you and I were even in real estate the last time we saw sevens.
No.
So rates have pulled back a little bit. I do think 2023 we're poised to continue to see a little bit of a rate pullback, and more importantly, stabilization. If the rates can just stabilize in a range, right, then I think that'll give consumers a better feeling, and then therefore a little bit more confidence to go out and make these offers.
Gotcha.
So if I were to predict, I do think rates will slide back down, look to stabilize. I'm not going to say a specific range, but if we get back into the fives, I think that would be a highly positive factor for the market.
Yeah.
To give you kind of context, your national averages as of today, and like Steven said, we're January 3rd, 2023, your 30-year fixed is somewhere in the mid-sixes, somewhere in that range. So if we could slide down a little bit off that number, low sixes into the upper fives, I think that would go do a lot for the market and its confidence.
I think so too, and maybe give people more of an impetus to sell, because a lot of our issue here, if you don't know much about Lexington, obviously the further you get out, it gets to be a little less populated. But if you're right around Lexington, our largest issue is inventory, has been for a very, very long time, and you've heard me say this a lot of times. COVID did not cause us to have an inventory problem. We've had one for a very long time. And so what really exacerbated our problem was COVID, and then it was like, if I sell, well, where will I go?
Correct.
And so hopefully with a little bit more confidence, people will be more willing to sell, and I don't know, maybe people are going to move to Florida or move to other places, because we still fundamentally need more single family homes, but
we do.
A lot of people are less willing to put their home on the market without the confidence that they'll be able to find one.
I agree with that. I agree wholeheartely on all those points. Yeah, we've had an inventory, I don't want to say issue, but we've had an inventory scenario for quite a while.
Situation.
Yeah, situation. Yeah, and I think sellers kind of getting into some more predictions, sellers are going to play a major role in 2023. Why? Because, well, we need inventory. Some of the seller sentiment I do think is affected by the rates as well. So I agree, if rates improve a little, stabilize, that should give them more confidence as well. My other little prediction, or if you want to call this a prediction, but PSA for sellers, I do think they're going to have to be more realistic.
Oh yeah,
I think that's going to be another kind of key factor in 2023 is understanding that the markets have changed to a certain extent, and sellers are going to have to be more realistic, which that could be better for all of us.
Yeah, I think it makes for a little less stress. There's a way to still win without necessarily, expecting $60,000 over on,
100%. And I think you break down the numbers, right? Between 2020 and now, in a lot of markets, you've seen 30 to 40+% appreciation in the last, 2.5 years, 3 years? So if you bought a home prior to that, even if you didn't sell at the peak, you're still walking away with a heck of amount of appreciation.
Yeah.
And I think people don't think about it like that.
Yeah.
Say home prices slid down 5%. Well, in a lot of cases, you're still 20-30+% to the good,
right,
even if that happens.
Right.
So people don't think about it like that.
And I think sometimes we get very lost in short term because so much of what we do, at least in this country, it's very, very fast.
It is.
But real estate, especially in terms of wealth and coming out ahead, has always been a long game. Unless you're watching a lot of HGTV and you think that you're going to flip that house and make $1 million. But it's generally been a long game for anyone who's been involved and successful at buying and selling real estate. It's a hold and wait, and usually things turn out better than you started. Usually,
sure,
as long as it's long and you wait. So, do you have any bonus things? Any advice for how a buyer or seller can be smarter going into this market? I mean, don't try to time is one of the things that I hear you saying a lot, and I love that advice. But what else might a buyer or seller be looking to in order to be informed and making good decisions from a financial perspective? Yeah,
so I revert back to a few things that I've said for a number of different years, and that is, number one, is be prepared. I think you saw that in 2020 and 2021 exacerbated because everything was so busy. Like you said, it's quick. People weren't prepared. I think that caused part of people's kind of hectic experiences. So going into this market, 2023, which I do think has a chance to be busy, which I'll get into in a second, we need to be prepared, right? What does that mean as a buyer? Obviously working with professionals, being actually pre-approved, and I emphasize that word. Pre-qualification and pre-approved are two very different things, okay?
Yes, they are. Say it again for the people in the back.
There is a difference between being pre-qualified and being pre-approved. So be prepared in that sense, because if what we're kind of alluding to plays out, right? Say rates pull back, right? People get confident, spring market hits, homes are starting to come. Well, what's going to happen? Well, all the buyers that have sidelined themselves, waiting for rates to come down, are now going to re-enter the market, creating a little bit more of a competitive situation again. So we could find ourselves in another competitive situation, which is going to, in my opinion, stress the fact, be prepared. Right now, where you do have some buying power, or negotiating power, I should say, take the time, get pre-approved, review scenarios. The other thing I'll say for a buyer is it may be more relevant now than it has in the last arguably decade to look at different loan types, different rate structures. Again, 2020 and 2021, everybody and their mother, and rightfully so, 15, 20, 30-year fixed. Why? Because the fixed rates were literally at all-time lows.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was wild.
It was no-brainer, right?
Right.
Which, hey, frankly, made mortgage people's job maybe a little too easy. Okay, I'll throw that out there. That doesn't always mean that's the best loan type in every situation. When in reality, there are different ways to curb affordability.
Yep.
Fixed rates, sure. Adjustable rates.
Rate mortgage.
ARM stands for adjustable rate mortgage. That product had a ton of negativity surrounding it post 08.
Yep.
I think it's just misunderstood. But as a buyer who's trying to, again, look at different ways to change affordability now that home prices have continued to go up and rates are up, that's another option.
And why would someone do that? If someone's watching, like, well, why would I take that adjustable rate? I don't want it to adjust. What is the, how does that work?
Sure.
Besides the immediate affordability.
Absolutely.
I know the answer of what I would tell a buyer, but what would you tell a buyer?
No, absolutely. For me, number one, if you go down that path, make sure you understand the product, right?
Yeah.
But let's just use an example. Say your 30-year fixed today is at 6.5. The historical benefit of an ARM is that your rate right now, your initial rate is going to be lower. So let's say you could get an ARM at 5.5. Well, that's 100 basis points or 1% below your market fixed rate. So number one, does that provide you an immediate benefit? Yes. Why? Because your payments are obviously going to be lower because your rate's lower.
Around 1% is a fortune in interest rates.
Yeah. So that could help with affordability. Now, the adjustable thing. Rate's going to change at some point in the future.
Right.
That doesn't mean that you can't refinance. So I think from a strategic standpoint, excuse me, a lot of people have kind of thought about this. Well, if we think rates are going to come down in the next few years, whether it's this year or 2024, I'll just refinance. And I agree with that. Because people getting a 6 rate at 7.5 or 6.5, they're thinking the same thing. Well, I'm just going to refi. So if you think about it like that, I'd rather save myself quite possibly 100 basis points and refi just as I had planned here in the next couple of years.
Or maybe you're moving, because that's a big one. People are not in the same jobs anymore for 20 years. A lot of times you're working for GM or Toyota or whatever, you're moving every 2 years, but you really want to own a home because you don't want to spend the money on the rent. So what does it matter if you're on an ARM if you're not going to be here in 7 years for that ARM to mature into something that's truly adjustable?
That's a great point, and I think a forgotten question that a lot of mortgage professionals don't really ask their clients is, what's their outlook for this home? Right?
Is this forever?
Yeah. I mean, do you and your wife see yourself?
Yeah.
Or, do you and your spouse see yourself being here for a decade? Okay. Well, that could influence our decision. Or
100%.
Do we plan on getting married, having kids, moving within 3, 5, 7 years? Which is very statistical. Makes even more sense.
Yeah. And what about for buyers on the flip side? So, sorry, sellers, but buyers was be prepared. And also look at other options because of the market we're in today, the options that you may have chosen 2 years ago may not be as relevant or as advantageous. So on the seller side of things, what do you think makes someone an informed seller?
So I'm going to throw out kind of a bonus for the buyer and the seller.
Please
start there. And I truly do believe this is working with a true real estate professional. Again, people were able to buy and sell homes pretty freely in the last couple of years.
Yes.
Now this market is changing.
Yep.
And I do think the desire and the need for expertise is maybe more important than it has been in a long time. So buyer or seller arguably more, work with an experienced real estate professional. Because I do think sellers, again, one of my tips or points was you're going to have to be more realistic. Pricing that home and marketing it appropriately, I think, is going to be important. And in order to do that, in my opinion, you need to work with a trusted real estate professional. So that's going to be number one for buyer and seller. We talked about being realistic. I'm going to revert back to something that people don't think about this on the seller side, but you need to be prepared as well. Why? Because you're going to have, number one, a strategy in order to sell this current home, but then you're going to need to be prepared for where you're going.
Yep.
People, I think, oftentimes think about selling the home. Well, that's easy enough. Where are we going? Do we know where we're going? Do we know how we're going to finance that if financing is going to be involved? Is there some kind of contingent offer that we can make? Which I think have been more accepting, but not in all cases.
Yes.
So I think the sellers need to be prepared and really have that conversation with their real estate professional based on where they're going. Are you going to help negotiate that? Are we going to make a contingent offer? How do we plan for that?
And I want to throw in a bonus there too. Working with a professional, of course, we're advocates for that, but also, it's easy to be focused on the money and say, I've got an offer signed and I'm going to walk away with X amount of dollars, but the devil is in the details. I recently had a sale and the seller, we had all said, we're closing on this day. And about 2 weeks before closing, the seller said, well, I wasn't going to leave until this day. And this day happened to be like 3 weeks after. And I'm sitting there kind of like, well, that's not what you said you were going to do. That's not what the buyer said they were going to do. Where does this imaginary date come from? And it turns out this particular seller was like, well, that's how I've always done it. And I'm thinking, well, where was that written? So your literacy in your agent's literacy and what it is you're signing and what it is you want, it's up to you as a seller to communicate what it is you want when you're negotiating with the other side, and to also understand what it is you're expected to do by a legal contract in order for you to get that money that you're so excited about getting. Because otherwise you can find yourself in some really difficult spots where you lose money or you just have to concede some things that you weren't expecting to have to concede.
Agree 100%. Agree 100%.
That was very unpleasant. Man.
And it can be. Those situations can be very unpleasant.
Yeah.
But to your point, in my opinion, a lot of them could be avoided.
Yeah, they can. So. They absolutely can. Any more seller points there?
No. I think work with a professional, be realistic, and then be prepared on your exit strategy.
Yes.
Are going to be my 3 big ones for sellers.
Awesome. I'm going to put those in big giant letters on the screen. Well, Mitch, I really appreciate your time. Yeah. I appreciate your expertise. I appreciate your enthusiasm for the details in life, because the details really do matter. 1% and 1/4% have a world of difference in someone's life and how they reach their goals. So I hope that this has been enlightening to you in some fashion. You can reach Mitch either in the description of this video or likely somewhere on the actual screen. But we're coming up against more, I don't want to say difficult, but certainly different times in 2023. I think that is safe to say. And so you don't necessarily want to go with someone who it's always been easy for them. You want someone with some experience, and I would say Mitch certainly is qualified for the experienced label. He's responsive. He's a little bit of a dork, as he said. His words, not mine. And he knows what he's talking about. So there are lots of options. You got to choose what's best for you, but do it in an informed way. Don't be haphazard. Don't ask your cousin in Montana first what you should do. Ask the person who lives right here in the local spot, because real estate is local. That's all I've got for you today. Hopefully the next time I talk to you, I will be able to speak in a way that doesn't sound like I have some awful disease or virus. But until then, adios, and thanks for watching.